Although they really shouldn't be, female characters in gaming have been a long-standing source of contention. In the early days of gaming, with the majority being arcade games or ports of them, the female role in a game was almost always that of a damsel in distress. Be it Pauline being kidnapped by Donkey Kong, Princess Peach kidnapped by Bowser, or Marion being dragged off at the start of Double Dragon, the women in these games merely served as a thin plot device to explain the playable character's motive. I don't know if it's coincidence that I picked those three games to mention, but I'm noticing a pattern here. They were always abducted at the start of the game. It wasn't long before the first female protagonists arose. Certainly not the first, but arguably the most notable was Samus in 1986's Metroid on the NES. The twist was that Samus wasn't revealed to be female until the end of the game, having been concealed in futuristic armour up until this point. I'd say that this was the first step towards portraying strong female characters in video games, and was definitely the first instance of a strong female lead, despite Samus not being the first female protagonist. The way Nintendo introduced the female lead was perfect. Let the player form their own opinion of this character while playing through the game, and only reveal to them the sex of that character at the very end. This removed any pre-held prejudices, so by the time Samus was revealed to be a she, it really didn't matter. And that's the point really, it shouldn't matter. Unfortunately, the path for female video game characters was still to be a bumpy one, moving into the late 80s and 90s. The most contentious aspect of female characters is in the design, in particular the overt sexualization. Tyrus in Sega's Golden Axe is tough as nails, but wears what is essentially a bikini, although Axe Battler isn't wearing much either, to be fair. The games most guilty of this are undoubtedly the fighting genre, with games like Street Fighter having scantily clad girls from around the world kicking 7 bells of shit out of each other. Now, one could argue that these are strong female characters as they're tough, often muscular, and could kick the arse of even the world's toughest male fighters, but then again some of their attire could be considered risque. After Street Fighter 2, every other developer followed suit, and things only kicked up a notch when the 3D fighters came into the fore. Soul Calibur had some excellent female fighters, but it's like they were saying, hey, here are some brutally fierce, strong female fighters, but yo, tits and ass! And Tekken was pretty guilty of this too, although not to such an extreme. Dead or Alive went mental and just said fuck it, sticking their women in tiny bras or even straight up bondage gear. And by the time 2003 rolled around, the developers abandoned clothing altogether with the release of Dead or Alive Volleyball. Needless to say, these games did little to further the idea that female characters could make strong leads in video games. But hey, it's not all bad. The 90s featured some excellently well written female characters. The earliest I can think of, and probably my favourite, is Governor Elaine Marley from the Monkey Island series. Here's a game where you play as Guybrush Threepwood, who is what can only be described as a bumbling imbecile, but the leading lady, Elaine, is headstrong, intelligent, and the island's governor. Although admittedly she does fall into that early 80s gaming stereotype by getting herself kidnapped later in the first game, but at no point is she a damsel in distress. Instead, she's fully in control and designs her own escape plan, which Guybrush spectacularly interrupts. In fact, it's Elaine that ends up rescuing him, and not for the last time in the series. Elaine has everything that a strong female character, or any character for that matter, should have: brains, wit, and an interesting story, and she's definitely the first place anyone hoping to write such a character should look. And Elaine isn't the only strong female character in those games. Another great example from the first game is Carla the Swordmaster. Dressed similarly to any other swashbuckling pirate on the island, she's an expert sword fighter and has a razor sharp tongue to match. The go-to mention for strong female characters is often Lara Croft from 1996's Tomb Raider, although in my opinion she overlaps with the issues the fighting games have, because tits. The Resident Evil series has some great female characters like Jill Valentine and Claire Redfield. The key here is that while still being attractive young women, they're portrayed as being capable people who have the wits to survive the events of the game. A good analogy would be to look at the Jurassic Park films. The first film has very strong female roles, arguably stronger than their male counterparts, Dr. Ellie Sattler in particular. She's extremely intelligent, has her wits about her, and is very good at surviving the perils of a dinosaur-ridden island. The latest film, Jurassic World, despite being released over 2 decades later, does little to convince the viewer that its female cast are anything but panicked women that need saving. I think that Resident Evil portrayed their female characters well, allowing their qualities to shine in the face of extreme danger. The 90s also saw the rise of the female antagonist, with characters like the morally devoid Shodan from 1994's System Shock, Metal Gear Solid's Sniper Wolf, and Final Fantasy VIII's final boss Ultimecia, proving that a strong female character doesn't necessarily have to be on the player's side. After the 90s, female leads seem to have developed into what they always should have been: admirable, inspiring people. Series like Uncharted and Assassin's Creed have female characters that stand alongside their male counterparts in both skill and capability. Characters like Clementine in Telltale's The Walking Dead, Elizabeth in Bioshock Infinite, and Ellie in The Last of Us tell stories of young women overcoming extreme adversity to showcase their mental strength and determination. Although one could argue that these characters are very young, so their sex is actually less consequential than their age. More and more we're seeing strong female leads in gaming, with Faith from Mirror's Edge springing to mind, and The Witcher 3's Triss and Ciri, although the game is arguably sexist on the whole, plus all the sex. Even the Tomb Raider franchise saw Lara Croft brought up to date, being just as adventurous and tough as she always was, but despite still being hot, is now far less sexualised and is a more gritty, well-rounded character. I guess now the debate on female video game characters is the same as any debate surrounding the role of women in any walk of life. It should be a moot point. I'll wrap up with something that Joss Whedon once said after being asked why he always writes strong female characters. Because you're still asking me that question.